Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Squat Cobbler number 19 versus Kelly Toole at KELLYTHUL on Twitter.
And I'm Mike at Official Pagan on just about everything.
And we're continuing our walk through the Alice Cooper album lineup, and we are now to Alice's first solo album, Welcome to My Nightmare, released in March of 1975. Before we get started, Mike, any initial reaction to this album?
So it's interesting. I believe it was actually because obviously I was born after a lot of these early records came out. This was the first Alice solo record that I heard, but at the time wasn't aware it was the first solo record.
I've always known there's kind of been, it's a little easier with Alice than it is with David Bowie, in that there it appears to be kind of eras of Alice. There's the first two album era, which we'll call the Dark Times, just the first two. Then there's the original Alice Cooper group era, which we just wrapped up with Muscle of Love. And now we move into the solo, but even in the solo career, there's chunks. And I would suggest the next at least three albums fall into the next stage of development, which is, in my opinion, a little less hard rock and a little more hard rock / Broadway.
Yeah, it definitely brings the theatricality that the Alice Cooper group played with to the complete forefront.
Yeah, a lot more horns, a lot more polished sound, much stronger storyline. But
yeah, the storyline is definitely more clearly refined and defined in this. And also we get Bob Ezrin back, who I think was kind of sorely missed on Muscle of Love.
Yeah, I would agree completely. It is interesting that, at least for me, Ezrin to this point, his track record has been he brought the Detroit sound forward into Alice's music. I think he did a great job on this album, but I would not depict his contribution as bringing the Detroit sound forward.
No, that's definitely accurate.
All right. Well, why don't we just take a little meander through the track listing? Welcome to My Nightmare, which, by the way, was released on a lovely pink cassette tape back in the day. Welcome to My Nightmare opens up with the title track, Welcome to My Nightmare.
Quickly, just to follow with yours, was the album released as a pink cassette or the song Welcome to My Nightmare as a pink cassette single?
My experience, I don't know about the single, but my experience was my first crossing pass of Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare was via a cassette tape, and it was a pink cassette tape of the whole album.
That's pretty cool. I'm going to have to go and hunt that down. I'm a big fan of cassette tapes, as you know.
Very cool. So what are your thoughts on Welcome to My Nightmare, Mike?
It's definitely one of those songs that I think most people know, even people that aren't, stereotypical Alice fans. I know it's kind of a staple of the live shows. It's one of the highlights for me of the live album that we keep bringing up, Fistful of Alice, which also includes a snippet of one of the other songs from this album as the intro to it on that version. I think it really sets up the almost narrative in a literal sense feel of this record that we didn't have before. Like, instead of just a connecting theme, there really is narration through this album. And you start to get a feel for that right away on this track.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's a very well-known song. I like the song a lot. I like the versions of these songs on this album, but it's a distinct difference when you hear them live. There's so much more power when they're live, because when we'll go through the different eras of Alice, but there's kind of Broadway Alice, and then we'll get into Cocaine Alice, and then we'll get into Off of Everything Alice. When he kind of came back off of everything, he did the Nightmare Returns concert, which was his first concert, I think, ever doing it clean. And he opens it up with Welcome to My Nightmare, and it's just a hammer blow. It's just really strong and just really strong delivery, where I do enjoy this version on the song, but it lacks the punch when you hear it live. And the version on Fistful of Alice is pretty amazing as well.
Yeah, the version on Fistful of Alice might be my favorite, and I hate to keep bringing that particular album up, but it is just such a strong performance, and they use a piece of Steven as the intro to it. It just sounds bigger, it sounds heavier. It's already a good song. I really like the song, but it just makes it such a bigger, heavier, more rock-oriented song, whereas this is more an introduction to a story.
And we move from Welcome to Nightmare into Devil's Food, which is actually a fairly short track.
It is a short track. I really like it, though. You?
I do. I do as well. it's interesting because it's more of just kind of laying, if Welcome to Nightmare set the foundation, I guess Devil Food's the rebar, or it's just to kind of reinforce kind of where we're going. It is also a little bit has a little bit more of a punch to it, but it's a good song, and it's pretty different than anything we've heard from Alice so far.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, some of especially like the backing vocals and some of the guitar tracks kind of remind me of like a light version of the more prog rock stuff that was coming out around this time.
That's fair. That's fair. Anything else on Devil's Food?
Nothing else on that one. I know Bob Ezrin is credited as a writer on that one, along with on many of the tracks. Actually, that is one of them, though.
And then we move into The Black Widow with a introduction by Vincent Price, which is close to my favorite moment on this album. Is his very kind of clever delivery as he's taking some child through the spider collection at a museum.
Yeah, it's a really cool song. It's one of my favorites. It's one of the ones that always stood out to me in large part because of the Vincent Price contribution. Are you a Vincent Price fan?
I am.
Yeah, he had a lot of good stuff, and I'm particularly a big fan of the Dr. Phibes movies.
Oh yes, those are excellent. He's got such a kind of like Alice. He's got such a broad catalog of different things. But I've always enjoyed him, and I can't think of anybody better suited than Vincent Price. If Alice is gonna bring in a narrator, that's a pretty good choice. I can't imagine Christopher Walken doing the introduction.
It's funny you say that because over the years there have been a lot of bands, especially rock and metal bands, who have used actors who are known for their horror roles to do narration on their records. Doug Bradley's done it a lot more recently on a lot of albums, for example. But for me, and I'm sure, there could have been someone who did it before this, but for me, that all traces back to this song.
Yeah, I think perfectly executed leads into, then we get really kind of our first taste of the kind of more heavy guitar domination that we're kind of used to with the Alice Cooper group. This has got some great riffs to it. It's a great song. Again, another one that's tremendous live.
Agreed.
And then we get a bit of a change of pace. We move into Some Folks, which in the concert, I believe, featured some tap dancing skeletons.
Unfortunately, on the album, you don't see tap dancing skeletons while you listen to it.
That's a shame. That would have added to the ambience quite a bit. I'm real interested to hear where you land on Some Folks.
Some Folks definitely brings back sort of, like you said, that almost like show tune-esque element, which it's not like this is new for Alice Cooper. The Alice Cooper group did this a few times. Not one of my favorite songs on the album. You?
I like it almost as a novelty. It just it's so different in terms of structure, delivery, and all those types of things. As as a standalone song, if I just heard it not as part of this album, I'd probably like it better than kind of nestled in here. It's reasonable enough, far from my favorite track on the album. Just an interesting one for me. So this was the first time I'm like, so this is a lot different Alice than I'm used to. But it's well crafted and enjoyable. But in terms of everything else on this album, not my favorite.
Yeah, and I think you kind of nailed it when you said it works as a novelty.
And speaking of novelties, to this point, if I'm not mistaken, there's never been a ballad. Well, I take that back. I guess there's Beautiful Flyaway on Easy Action that was close to a ballad, but at least a softer song.
Yeah, I mean, there's been softer moments, but yeah, as a full track, no. Not that I can think of. And I couldn't have even pulled out the Easy Action reference because I'm already sort of repressing that again.
A wise move. I think definitely a wise move. But
I'm so glad we've moved so far away from that at this point.
Every album is another step away from that, which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
But Only Women Bleed, I think fair to say, the first card-carrying ballad that Alice has ever done. It did real well on the radio. It's a ballad for most of it. It does build up in a couple places on there. Your thoughts on this song?
I have a lot to say about this song. So prior to listening to the album, I had heard this song because it's a pretty well-known song. It's a big hit. And it's also been covered by a lot of people. a lot of people. I don't know how familiar you are with some of the cover versions that have come out of this.
You're not going to drop a Pat Boone on me here, are you?
No, but I mean there's some weird ones though. Ike and Tina Turner covered this. Etta James covered it. Guns N' Roses covered it on their Use Your Illusion tour. The Guns N' Roses one makes a lot more sense because musically, obviously, it's more in line. And they've actually worked with Alice Cooper on a couple of tracks. There's also a cover by Tori Amos, and this is the one that I kind of wanted to bring up. Are you a Tori Amos fan?
No, I'm not.
Actively not, or are you just not familiar with her work?
So I guess I depict as not interested as becoming familiar with her work, unless you talk me into it here.
No, I'm going to go the opposite direction. So I am, I guess in general, I would say that I am a Tori Amos fan. But she covered this for a sort of controversial cover song record that she did called Strange Little Girls. On that album, she took songs by male artists and reinterpreted them from a female perspective in a way that sort of suggests or sort of takes shots at the male artists that she's covering. And this caused a lot of controversy when it came out because obviously, you know, she's taking shots at famous artists. This song did not make the final cut of the album, but it was used as a B-side for one of the singles. I didn't listen to her cover of it. I thought the covers on the album weren't good and that she relied really heavily just on her like concept behind doing the record and the controversy that she felt it was going to bring more so than her performances of the songs anyway. That album, I hated it so much that about a year ago, we were talking about it on a podcast, a different podcast, and making fun of that album led to the title of my new album. So I didn't even realize that Alice Cooper, once again, until I put this together, informed my music directly again. Because her album was called Strange Little Girls, so we called our new album Dead Girls, as a nod to Tori Amos.
There aren't many nods to Tori Amos, so I think
No.
there's a territory there.
There's not too many, but yeah, that's... So I overall, again, actually really like Tori Amos. I just thought she made a really weak cover record and relied entirely on her concept behind the cover record instead of her performance of the songs. I didn't realize that she had covered this because obviously I think I listened to the album once through. I certainly didn't seek out the B-sides to it, so it wasn't until I was doing a little bit of research for this that I even realized she covered this song, and I'm not going to go and listen to it.
You got me really intrigued though with her kind of reinterpreting it to kind of go after the creators. I'd be because this song kind of does not paint the narrator in a very good light anyway.
No, well, and that was kind of the thing. Like the songs she chose, like some of them made sense and don't paint the narrators in a good light. So doing it from a female character's perspective makes sense. At the same time, though, a lot of people at the time it was released, and I felt the same way. It's weird to sort of take another artist's song and sort of turn it back on them, not really knowing or at least applying your own meaning to what they intended from their work.
Boy, I'd never heard of that, so I'm intrigued, but I don't know how much I want. Although I may at least hunt up this cover, her cover of Only Women Bleed.
Maybe it would be a good YouTube link in the blog post.
That would be good call on that. We'll do that. I like this song. Again, a different Alice than what we're used to. Again, strong narrative to it. He's a reasonable ballad singer, much to everyone's surprise, because if you really think about what you know Alice for, it's that snarl. It's the first of 3 that he and Dick Wagner do together, all of which do really, really well. Anything else on Only Women Bleed?
I don't think so. I just thought the Tori Amos thing was interesting when I came across it because I'd never heard the cover, like I said, because of my overall feelings about the album. But if we include it in the blog post, I might listen to it. So hopefully it's on YouTube.
I got to think the odds are good, but we'll find out after the recording and hopefully include that in the blog post for the squaddies out there. All righty, we'll move on to side 2, which opens up with Department of Youth. And this is Alice, Dick Wagner again, and Bob Ezrin composition. Thoughts?
It's a pretty good song. I know it was one of the singles off of there. It's not a song that is a huge standout for me in the Cooper catalog. Like I sort of forgot about it until I was re-listening to the album. Doing a little bit of research on it, it was covered by Pretty Boy Floyd. So there's that.
It is probably, for me, amongst my favorite songs on this album. For a couple reasons, but again, this is one that live is so much better.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, I was speaking just on the like it just sort of it's good, but not a standout like favorite Alice Cooper song for me. But live works so much better.
As we kind of continue to talk about Alice live albums coming up, Live from Montrose kicks off the concert with Department of Youth with a big Phantom of the Opera organ intro, followed by a screen, followed by them just opening the opening guitar lines of Department of Youth, and just so much more power in a live version of it, where you really start to appreciate this song. And it's just everything is so clean and well produced on this album, which is a good thing. But in some ways, part of Alice's charm is that rougher edge, and it almost seems like some of that has been produced out.
Yeah, I really think that this album to me, and I know it's a concept album and they had played with concepts before, but it really does feel almost more like a soundtrack or like a story. Do you remember like storybook albums?
Yep.
It sort of feels almost like a dark, edgy storybook album, whereas the live versions of these songs, like you said, just play so much better because then they really get the full attention as an individual song and not a part of the whole.
If you've not seen Alice Cooper live, you absolutely need to go see Alice live, because unlike you see some live acts and the sound is nowhere even close to the album because they get a lot of help in production and all those types of things. I can't think of an Alice Cooper song that isn't better live. I think that and sometimes they're already good songs, but then all of a sudden it goes into overdrive when it's live. This is definitely one of those. Spoiler for down the road, another one, Woman of Mass Distraction on Dirty Diamonds was another song I was kind of liking, and then I saw it live and I go, okay, I really like this song.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so
here we go. The count. We have to add one to the count.
That's right. For those of you who've been on journey with us so far, Mike and I are keeping track of the Alice Cooper necrophilia song count. I Love the Dead, we both agreed was number one. We're not counting Refrigerator Heaven officially as a necrophilia song. So I Love the Dead was number one, but in its own little subtle way, Cold Ethel clocks in as number two.
Yes.
And what's the Mike Polinsky take on Cold Ethel?
So I like this song, and I love songs about necrophilia, as we discussed before. It is not, so unfortunately for this song, I do have to compare it because it's a second, possibly third, depending on whether or not you count Refrigerator Heaven. But it's a second necrophilia song, so I have to compare it to I Love the Dead. It's not as good as I Love the Dead for me.
I'd agree. You know, in terms of like my favorite songs about necrophilia, I would continue to have I Love the Dead ahead of Cold Ethel. Although it's a bouncy little tune.
Oh yeah, I don't dislike the song in any way, but just because necrophilia is not necessarily a common topic for songs, and because Alice Cooper has already covered this territory before, that puts me, for me personally, puts me in a position where I just automatically have to compare them. And in comparison, I Love the Dead comes out above this song.
I would agree. It's always good to infuse a good sense of humor in your song about necrophilia, and I Love the Dead was more straight up pro necrophilia material, where this has a little humor.
And I think, listen, we're all pro necrophilia here, right? Is that fair to say?
I probably wouldn't depict it exactly as that. I'll go pro necrophilia songs for now, if you don't mind.
I mean, that's fine. Everybody heard it. Kelly Toole said he's pro necrophilia, which is all we really needed to know.
Yeah, there's a lot of audio clips that can come from Squat Cobbler that will do me no service.
All you have to do, kids, is take the audio, and where he says, I'm pro necrophilia songs, just cut out songs, and you have it. It's not even a creative edit that you need to do there.
All right. Now, I'm going to, if it's all right with you, we can talk about the next three songs kind of collectively, because to a degree, they're almost a suite.
Yes.
Of Years Ago, Stephen, and The Awakening, which is some of the absolute coolest parts of this album as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Other than, the title track and Only Women Bleed, when I think about this album, I sort of think about this suite of songs.
So step me through a little bit kind of what you're thinking about these three.
So I think they work really well on the record. I think it's great having such a direct connection between the songs works obviously so well for a concept record like this. Particularly with Steven, that's probably my favorite of the three. And again, going back to how these songs work live, and I think it's fair to say our collective favorite live Alice Cooper record, A Fistful of Alice, a good chunk of Steven is used as the beginning of Welcome to My Nightmare on that album. And that works, I think, really well on that record.
I'd agree. So I think of these, they all work so well together. They all have kind of great moments in it. I do like a little bit of parts of years ago where you've got Alice ping ponging back and forth between "I'm a little boy," "No, I'm a great big man," some kind of again very show-esque delivery of things, narrative delivery, but it's chilling, it's good, and Alice can pull off a frightened little boy pretty well in years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
But Stevens the Hammer Blow for me, it's really strong. Also another one that, much to my surprise, I didn't know how that would necessarily translate live, but boy, it does, and it does incredibly well, particularly when it's paired like on Fistful of Alice with sliding into something else.
Do you know offhand, is there a live album that has these three songs maybe back to back?
I don't believe so in terms of anything I've seen, because the thing that might come, well, no, because even the Alice Cooper Show, which comes up here in a little bit as the first live album and by far his worst live album, it didn't do it. I'm sure there's a bootleg version out there. I'd have to go back and look at the set list for Welcome to My Nightmare, because it certainly seems like they'd want to string these three together in a live setting. But I'm not familiar. Have you ever seen anything where all three of these are done live?
No, that's what I was asking you because I'm not familiar with it if it's out there. Now, as we're talking about them as one grouping like this, it just made me curious if that existed in some sort of commercial form. Like you said, I'm sure there's a bootleg out there.
So years ago sets the tone really well. Stephen is really the centerpiece, and Awakening kind of glides us out of that little trio of songs. Some really great moments in all of them. Really fun to listen to.
Yeah, I like them all, and Steven, for me, is really one of the highlights of the album.
It is probably the strongest song, and then it wraps up with Escape.
And what are your thoughts on Escape, sir?
So this was a very strong album. I really enjoyed it. The narrative thread was strong, a lot of creativity. And Escape it's an anthemic song. It's got a nice pop to it. You know, we've just kind of come out of this trilogy of kind of more kind of emotional and mood oriented type of things, and then we slide into Escape, which takes right off with just kind of a 70-ish guitar riff and gets kind of anthemic through it. So, I mean, I like this song. It just seemed to me it fell a little bit short to kind of cap up what has been a very strong outing. I mean, it makes sense narratively to finish it with this, but it seemed like the last song on this album would have been incredibly important. And while this is a very serviceable, enjoyable song, it felt just a little bit short to I felt a little disappointed that this was the end of it. I still think it's a good song, but I just felt the buildup was such that I would have liked to have seen something a little bit stronger. Your
Yeah, I
thoughts?
completely agree. It's a fine song. I have no problems with the song itself, but even listening to it back, preparing for this, like it just doesn't have the punch that it feels like it should.
Yeah, and I have no frame of reference. What's kind of interesting is there was a vibe clearly running through this whole album that Escape kind of jumps off of a little bit. Up until this point, every song, Alice did the lyrics for everything, but you've got Alice always with a writing credit, and then Dick Wagner or Bob Ezrin as the other one. This last song, Escape, is written by Alice, Mark Anthony, and Kim Fowley, and that was something in prep for the show I had always missed. It was the kind of that this is an interesting trio, and I believe this will be Mark Anthony and Kim Fowley's only contribution to the Alice Cooper catalog.
As far as I'm aware, yes. But it sort of like you said, I actually didn't realize Kim Fowley had a contribution to this until I was doing the research for it.
So that may be why all of a sudden just there's like a little glitch on the tone. But overall, this is a really enjoyable album. Very creative, a lot of special moments to it. One I for a solo album takeoff, really good. And at this point, so it had come out of Muscle of Love. The band had kind of booted Ezrin and said, "Hey, we got our own ideas for Muscle of Love." That album suffered for that. Then everybody was kind of saying, "Hey, maybe we all need to do some solo stuff." There was no official breakup yet. So Alice went and did his solo album, and of course he brought Bob back in right away, and benefited from it. So I think from a solo album perspective, a very, very strong start.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good solo album. It, I think, is a stronger record than Muscle of Love was, even if it doesn't quite hit the classic Alice Cooper group records. Bringing Ezrin back was great. The songs overall work a little bit better live, which I think we both agree on that. Escape doesn't quite fit the sonic tone of the rest of the record, but as you pointed out, that might be due to the fact that you have two other co-writers on this who didn't contribute anything else to the record.
And now we will, before we do our rankings, we need to do what is now a standing tradition in All Squat Cobblers About Alice Cooper. We need to identify on this album what would be the Pat Boone cover off of Welcome to My Nightmare.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, like we had kind of touched on, a lot of songs off this record have been covered already, especially Only Women Bleed. If you look up just that particular song, you're going to find dozens of covers of that song. And also, there was an Alice Cooper tribute record. I don't know if you're familiar with. I want to say it came out in like 98 or 99 called Humanary Stew.
Yes.
And a number of songs, I think it's like 4 or 5 of the tracks came from this record.
Now, is Humanary Stew a real thing? Because that is a direct lift from Black Widow after the Price introductions, where Alice tells us, "These words he speaks are true. We're all Humanary Stew. We don't pledge allegiance to the Black Widow." I love the phrase "Humanary Stew," but is it a thing?
I mean, I'm gonna say no, and I mean it sounds cannibalistic or consuming of humans. So I guess in the Black Widow song it's not cannibalism, but for us it would be cannibalism. So I mean, I'm sure people have made stew out of people.
I guess so.
I guess it is. So I mean, he definitely. I'm sure Alice coined that phrase, but I guess it does happen.
It was a great album title and could possibly be a great band name as well. So
yeah, if you were going to start an Alice Cooper tribute band, Humanary Stew is a good title, good name for your band.
Absolutely. So my selection for the Pat Boone cover off of this would be Some Folks.
Yeah, I'm 100% going to agree with you because it has those almost Pat Boone-esque elements just built right in. It's almost like Alice knew someday Pat Boone would cover one of his songs, and he was kind of setting that one up for him.
So each album he puts a little Easter egg of this is the Pat Boone song, and Some Folks is our unified position as the Pat Boone song off of this album.
Absolutely, and as the Squatties remember, Kelly and Pat Boone tend to love the same stuff. So
go back to the tapes, folks. You'll find out that's not quite right, but there's a bitterness with Mike around the top of our list that is not gonna go away. But speaking of our lists,
is it that time?
Yes, it is. Where do you put Welcome to My Nightmare?
All right, so I do have my list open, so let me pull it up here. So I correctly have Love It to Death as number 1 and only number 1. Now, here's what's interesting, and I don't know if you saw this on the list. We both have 2 number 5s.
Oh, that would be an editing issue. We'll have to fix that.
So I just want to state for the record, and there could be confusion since Kelly improperly does have a tie on his list. There are no ties on my list.
Yeah, we'll get that cleaned up on the new version. So
yeah, there's no ties. My list reads Love It to Death, Billion Dollar Babies, Killer, School's Out, Welcome to My Nightmare, Muscle of Love, Easy Action, Pretties for You. So I'm putting it number 5.
And so now you have 3 number 5s.
So this is my 3rd number 5 on my list.
Yeah, we'll get that cleaned up, and we'll retrospectively clean it up so the version on the blog post reads correctly. But that was somebody getting lazy, I guess, at the end. So sorry about that. My list reads more correctly: a tie for number 1 between Love It to Death and Billion Dollar Babies. Killer in the 3 spot. I am going to put Welcome to My Nightmare ahead of School's Out on the strength of the. I don't think that there's a moment in School's Out that parallels years ago Stephen and the Awakening. And so I think they're really, really close. But I think that kind of moment, plus Welcome to My Nightmare, plus the overall storyline, I'm going to, by the razor's edge, put it above School's Out.
I think that's an excellent choice. I mean, really, it is still. What would that make it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, it would be, because of your tie, it kind of throws your numbering off. But I see why you would edge it out over School's Out, and I had that same sort of thing going as we were talking this out. Really, what edges School's Out over this for me, though, is it does still have more of that Detroit rock sound that I love about the Alice Cooper group. Whereas this is so much more polished and moving a little bit away from that, even though Ezrin is at the helm again.
Yeah, and there's no Public Animal number 9 on Welcome to Nightmare, so that's a fair point. It's super close. We have these beachheads, I think, so there's the easy action, Pretty for You beachhead that's going to have a hard time breaking through. I think Muscle of Love will always kind of lock in as the least favorite original group album.
Yeah.
And then get to the top with Love It to Death, $1 Billion Babies, and Killer. That's going to be a hard trio to have something break into. So it's going to be interesting to see how these lists continue to fill out.
Yeah, I mean, our lists are pretty close. School's Out versus this. That's such a tight race for me as well. School's Out only narrowly edges it out, like I said, because of that more Detroit rock sound. And your list has that terrible choice of having a tie at number 1. So
I'm glad you moved on. It's very nice.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I want everybody to know I'm not going to dwell on this. I'm going to be the bigger person and not just keep pointing out Kelly's terrible mistake.
And that
$1 Billion Babies should be number 2. But hey, who am I? That's his list. He can make the wrong choice if he wants.
I got him tied and I listed it second. I threw you a bone.
Well, then shouldn't it be number? Well, all right. So it should be 1 and 1, but then you don't have a number 2. Like you go 1, 1, 3.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what you're supposed to do. I don't know.
Yeah, but if it's a tie, wouldn't they both be number 1 then?
Okay. All right.
Like you'd have 1, 1, and then Killer would be 2.
Fine. Man, I got a lot of editing to do.
Right. No, I'm just curious at how we do this. Not that I'll have a tie because obviously, there is no ties. Love It to Death is number 1.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with it for now because there's 3 albums and Killer's the third. Just so happens that the first 2 are tied for the number 1. So
okay.
So we'll stick with that. We'll clean up the rest of the numbers. Welcome to My Nightmare for Mike will be sitting right above Muscle of Love in the number 5 position. And for me, it will be in the number 4 position, edging out School's Out. So there we go. And next album is Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Ezrin is still with him. We get the highly unlikely situation of disco music and Alice Cooper crossing paths.
And not the only time.
No. Definitely not the only time, and that's going to be an interesting one to talk through.
Are you feeling a 3-way tie coming?
No, I'm not. I'm not feeling a 3-way tie. I'm trying.
But just as a spoiler alert for everyone, Kelly has mentioned a couple of times that there is an album coming that he feels so strongly about. I would not be surprised if we get a tie off of that one, since you're allowing ties on your list.
I am. I'm getting close to not. putting a certain $1 Billion Baby album to just kind of lock it in. So I will stand by my position that neither album is superior to the other. They're both outstanding, but I know you feel differently.
I know I've sort of danced around it and been cryptic.
Yeah, we've been able to pull out those threads to see that you might feel differently.
I'm glad that you were able to find the subtext, the clues of subtext that I've left you along the way.
Powers of active listening. Thank you, folks, for actively listening to our review of Welcome to My Nightmare. Alice Cooper Goes to Hell is up next. Thanks for listening.
I
love the Monster Dog songs.